Okay, hello everybody. Today is Thursday, December 1st, and this is the OLM V1 Milestone 1 story generation meeting. So yesterday we finished generating a number of issues for, I think it was number 63. Yep. So at this point, we've generated a number of steps that are effectively going to allow the user to define a package, and that package is then going to be sent to DEPI as a constraint, and those constraints are going to, if we look at the end of this, basically decide what needs to be installed, and then it's going to send what we'll just refer to as the solution set back to the operator controller. And it's not entirely clear right now whether or not the solution set is going, like what that is going to include. And Joe, I'm curious, do you think we can continue generating items for, say, 64, which is the operator controller taking a DEPI solution set and looking at basically installing or retrieving the stuff that it needs to install it? I assume we can, because it's either going to, like, there's a potential step that the operator controller needs to actually go and collect the list of bundle deployments it needs to create, or that information is just going to appear in the solution set. Can we start filling this one out? Making the assumption that one of those two things happen. Joe here.
To me, I feel like that's an implementation detail that doesn't matter that much at this point. So I would probably defer to Per and Catherine about which they think is easier or more likely to happen. And then that's what we just go with for now.
I'm with that.
Sorry, Alex, could you please repeat the question?
Yeah, of course. So what we basically covered in 63 is like, hey, the operator API has a bunch of package constraints.
Yep.
DEPI, what do we install? And then DEPI comes up with some solution set, right? Mm-hmm. And the question is, there's a step where the entities in the solution are related to a bunch of off-cluster manifests, like an image, like an image format or something. And we have to make the decision whether or not DEPI is going to kind of include that information in the solution set, or if there's some step where
we have to dereference.
Yeah, like where the operator controller will be like, okay, DEPI told me that I need to retrieve stuff from this bundle. This is that. Let me go do that. So either the entity is converted into the manifest we need via DEPI or via the operator controller, and I'm not sure which one we think is going to be easiest. And I wouldn't say that this has to be totally decided on. Like we just need some framing so we can start generating the story, which is number 64, which focuses on, hey, we got some solution set and we need to start installing stuff.
Okay.
So essentially, I think the question is, on one side, we know we're going to ask DEPI for a solution. And on the other side, we're going to get the result. And well, on the other side, we need to make that solution applied to the cluster via DEPI bundle.
Right.
So what's the glue in the middle that is DEPI going to tell the operator controller, here's the images to use effectively, or is DEPI going to tell the operator controller, here's the entities that meet the solution, and then leave it to the operator controller to go look up those things somehow?
So the way that I've approached it now is that in the entity source interface, there is a get content method in which you would provide the particular ID, and then it will just return something. I think it's just an interface, curly brackets type, at any type. But this was sort of very tentative. So I'm just, I don't know. I'm a bit weary about sending over all of the content through the wire during resolution. I think we're probably better off just working with the metadata, because that's all that we really need. And then having either within DEPI or outside of it a way to then go and get the content that you need. But I don't know how you guys feel about that.
I'm fine going with that for now, where the operator controller has to go and retrieve this stuff before it can create the bundle deployments.
I think part of my question, and this is probably well beyond the scope of what we need to do for milestone 1, because in milestone 1, this is all happening in process, and whether it happens under the covers of 1 function call or 2 function calls, doesn't really matter that much. My overarching thought process is, if we ever extract DEPI out, then a resolution API, we're not going to put the full contents of the entire bundle blob in that API, because we might, like if we're storing it in etcd, then we might have a problem with the etcd storage limit. So my imagination was like, if we get to that point, then we're only going to return entity IDs. And then it's going to be up to the thing that's looking at that resolution object to go and figure out what those entity IDs represent. So that part makes sense. I think the part that I'm a little bit still worried about is like, who owns the entity ID? Is it DEPI, or is it the originating entity source? The reason I ask that is because right now there's no way of really guaranteeing a globally unique entity ID. And so we have different catalogs that provide the exact same package, like channel bundle. And so the only disambiguation is the catalog source name and namespace or something. So if we do that, then it seems like DEPI needs to own part of the entity ID name, which means that the lookup needs to somehow go through DEPI. So again, I think this is probably way out in the future for us to think about, and maybe is totally irrelevant. We can make a shortcut answer right now, but that's just what's in my head about like how this might progress.
So again, I didn't think too deeply about this yet, but I think my original stab was that the entity source itself would hand back the ID, and the way that they would construct a globally unique ID is by knowing who they are, right? So pushing that, or by any other means that they deem fit. And I think the resolver should be robust to ID clashes in some sense. So either by failing or by filtering things out, or like it should be able to, it should expect that maybe this will happen and know how to deal with it. So maybe robust is the wrong word, but it should definitely not just assume that everything is globally unique.
Yeah. So what I think I heard as the answer there, Alex, is we'll just have DEPI on one hand will return a bunch of entities, and then we'll call get content. So there will be a lookup.
Yeah, yeah. So we are going to assume that the operator controller will be responsible for retrieving the content associated with an entity in the solution set. So I think we're good there. And we may, I'm going to update this comment, and it might make sense just to, for sake of completeness, to look at 63 and add that as a, I think we called that out in here. Yeah, so we called that there, so we can update this comment for now, right? over here, this was kind of what kickstarted the whole thing, right?
Yeah, I think we can just get rid of that bullet point. Or, yeah, we just decided, I think.
Right. I'm just wondering, constraints at interface, do we ever actually call out that it's just returning the set of entity IDs?
It seems
Yeah, I
like
guess
that's
that's
assumed based on
number 3. Or you just call that out. Deppy, take a set of constraints and return a solution set consisting of entity IDs, right? Like at a very high level is what we want it to do.
Yeah.
Okie dokie.
One quick question, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Can you describe a scenario where it cannot satisfy an existing CR?
So when you say CR, you're talking about the operator CR?
Whatever's written here, I'm not actually sure what operator CR refers to, but I guess it's an instance of an operator object, if you actually call it that.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So the operator CR, so we're proposing for this very first one that we just have a package name field in the spec of the operator CR. And so what this workflow basically looks like is I would specify I want, etcd operator installed, and etcd operator would be the package name in this case. That would be sent to Deppy as a constraint in number 63, and it would, it's kind of like in the weeds here in terms of how it actually is done, but the operator controller vendors Deppy, and you basically use Deppy to figure out like what needs to be installed, and that's taken care of here. And we do have like, like track basically a success or failure when it reaches out to Deppy for a result given the set of constraints. And then let's assume that the set of constraints were satisfiable by entities within catalog sources available to Deppy. That's when we get to number 64, at which point we would have a solution set that consists of entity IDs. And we now need to take these IDs, reach out to the catalogs that contain these entities, and basically call a get content endpoint or function. And that function will basically provide us with the stuff that we need to build bundle for deployments, which is part of step 65, where we're like, okay, we got all these entity IDs, we need these bundle deployments, and we need to create them. And that's when the operator is actually installed on cluster by RecPack.
Thanks, that answers the question. So this is just simply the operator controller reconciling its own custom resources.
Basically, yeah. That's milestone 1. It's a hey, I give a package and you put something on the cluster representing that package, or tell me why it didn't work.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
And Daniel, we haven't really got too deep into this yet, but I imagine that the reconciliation and that's going to happen in the operator controller is going to always look at the global set of all operator objects, compile like the entire list of constraints, send that whole thing into Deppy and get the answer back, which has some interesting implications on how we surface errors in the right places. So I think that's kind of a TBD at this point still. But
yeah, I think
if we don't do it that way, then we're effectively doing like different resolutions per operator, which means you can get into situations where, you violate different conflicts and constraints because you're not looking at the global view.
Yeah, no, I think we need to do that because various operators among the global view could be related to each other by direct dependencies, right? So that needs to resolve correctly.
Right.
We just need to kind of keep the UX in mind in the sense that so what we are doing today is we are like telling the user, yeah, these are all the things that I'm going to install as part of the install plan, right? But it's not really the case. It's just what has been considered as part of resolving the install plan, I guess. So we have this problem today of compounding install plans and all the side effects that come with that as part of being namespace scoped, right? So if we now make this cluster scoped, we can't have the same rippling effects, right? In the sense that now just because something has been taken into account for doing resolution, it also shares the update policy, for instance, or it pops up in the report when a constraint couldn't be satisfied, even though that item in the report is completely unrelated to any of the constraints the operator expressed, right?
Yeah, like I think in this milestone 1, if I were implementing this, I would probably like, okay, we're going to consider all of the operator controllers or all of the operator objects during every reconciliation of the operator controller. If we get a resolution that fails, then the most naive implementation of raising that failure is to just copy that status to every single operator object and say like, hey, all of these operator objects combined result in a failed resolution. Here's the resolution failure. And of course, like that's not going to be the final solution because there's probably one of those operator objects that is the reason, or maybe there's a combination of the operator objects, but it's certainly not every single operator object contributing to that resolution failure. So I think the challenge for us is going to be to figure out how to fine tune that resolution failure messaging to make it a little more actionable.
Well, I'm not even convinced that reporting it on all the objects is actually a good idea. Maybe as a naive prototype, right? But like the worst thing we could do is you have 50 operators installed in a cluster. One fails to update or to resolve because it's depending on a certain cluster version and you don't have that. So now 50 operator objects are in an error state in the cluster just because one failed. That would be like a nightmare for an admin. So I don't think that.
So I just want to raise. I think we want. I think we call it out here. I think we're going to generate an issue, and I think as that issue is generated and we start actually working on this, we'll be able to call out like what is the proper way to do this. I don't think we need to solve this now.
So
and I think too on Nick's point yesterday, by the way, that like upgrading a single operator is still something we need to figure out as well. Like there are multiple things that are going to come into this situation in terms of like how do we handle when a failure happens? Like what if somebody just wants to upgrade one thing? And we talked, I think these are things that we need to figure out when we actually start, like we have an issue to speak to and we collect that feedback and propose a solution on that issue. But we haven't generated these yet, and I think that's the right place to have these conversations. Otherwise, I think we're going to detract from our ability to actually finish out milestone 1 by the end of the week. And I think we've already captured the fact that there just needs to be a way to capture a failed resolution and succeed through.
I think we should absolutely do the simple, dumb, but maybe not super helpful implementation of reporting that resolution failure somewhere. And if it means that we're not going to resolve globally, that's what it means. And then we go into a demo and Daniel, you ask like, okay, well, what happens if you add another thing for an operator object for a package that doesn't exist? And then after you do that, you go and ask for an operator that does exist. We'll demo that and it'll be like, well, you can't even install that operator that does exist because something else doesn't. And then we'll generate a new story about how to solve that and come up with a design for it. So I think that's probably the right approach, just to keep things well scoped.
Yeah, makes sense.
Alex, you're muted, right?
Bummer. Okay, sorry. So I was just saying that I think we have enough information to go on with number 64, and we can start populating this one. So we need to talk about, we get an entity ID is going to be the start of this story, and the end is going to come right before 65, which is where we're actually deciding what bundle deployments to create and delete. Okay, so edit this, action items. So the very first step is going to be for each entity ID, call the get content function for each entity in the solution set, right? So are there any other steps that we want to add to this ticket?
So does it need to collect all the installed bundle at this time so that we need to replace it, or eventually you have to remove it? It's not in a solution set, right?
Yeah, so that was something I was thinking about, where I think we still have to collect. It depends on whether or not there's like what metadata we have available for an entity ID, because we need to like we have a solution set of entity IDs, and we need it, like if it has the properties, we are then able to tie it to an existing entity that we installed on cluster, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's a order doesn't matter, but yeah.
So so from an optimization standpoint, doing a calculation to decide what catalogs we need to call, like for which entity IDs we actually need to call to get content from, probably makes sense. But the only issue I'm concerned about is if the content for a particular entity ID has changed. I don't think we support that, right?
Right.
So if the entity ID is consistent and it's already on cluster, we don't need to call the get content from. So it might make sense to do that solution comparison in this ticket. What are your thoughts, everyone?
Again, I'm really sorry. My wife just came in and disturbed me. What was the question?
Yeah, so we get this list of stuff that we need to install on cluster, right? It's a bunch of entity IDs. So like there is an opportunity to say, if we already had this stuff on cluster, we don't need to call this get content. But the more I'm thinking about this, we already said that like stuff on cluster doesn't influence the stuff we're going to install. So technically, we can just go ahead and say, get all the content, and then and then be prepared to apply it as a bundle deployment, because that would always result with the correct stuff on the cluster. And I'm trying to decide if it's worth not calling the get content from each catalog if it already exists. If like the entity ID that appears in the solution set is already on cluster.
Gotcha.
So is it a premature optimization to start not collecting content if it's already exists on cluster, is my question.
Yeah, I think for the scope of this ticket, let's just keep it simple. But that'll be the next additive change, I think, to this
Okay, so we're gonna say collect content for each entity ID provided in the solution set.
I think what I would say here to boil this down to what we actually need is we need to resolve an entity ID to a bundle image. And then we'll pick up on the next RuckPack integration story to say, okay, take those bundle images and make bundle deployments out of them. Actually, I would say a package name and bundle image.
Okay, and so what that would look like is that's going to be facilitated. There is no DEPI source adapter in this world. So the solution set, each entity ID is going to have that information, right? And then it's just the registry client connecting.
No, Per said like there's gonna be some DEPI API where we can call get content on it. So
Oh, I
all
see.
of this, from the operator controller's perspective, all of this is interacting with DEPI. It's just like different entry points into DEPI.
I see. Okay, so the DEPI API provides a get content endpoint that returns the package name and bundle URL for a given entity ID, right?
I would say that the get content endpoint just gives the controller back, you know, what Per was saying about like a arbitrary interface or raw JSON or something. It's going to be up to the operator controller to interpret that and resolve the package name and the bundle image out of it. Because DEPI does not know about bundles or package names or anything like that, really.
So just to throw a wrench, I've been playing a bit with generics in Go. And I think I'm going to use my Hack and Hustle day tomorrow to try and pepper in some generics into the current DEPI framework. In which case, we could potentially know what we're dealing with. But that's an aside discussion. I'm just throwing it out there too, in case anyone has feedback on that idea.
I think that's something great to look into. If you find a way to implement that, would you mind updating this ticket to reflect those changes?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, but for now, let's just assume that we're getting basically returns a blob that implements the, do we have a name for this interface that it's going to return? It's the entity content. I don't know what we're calling this.
I think if you just specify what you had before, it's good enough. Then we can figure out how to encode it.
Okay, so the operator controller then unpacks the, I guess it's the blob into the into an object that contains the package name and image URL, bundle image URL. Right.
Correct.
Okay, and then once we have the bundle image URL, that can actually just be implemented now in the next, like once we have the bundle image URL, that's now in DEPI's, sorry, RuckPack's territory to unpack, correct?
Essentially, the next step after, I think this story is complete once you've said that the operator controller has a package name to bundle image URL map from DEPI, from a DEPI resolution.
Right.
The next step is covered in the next story, which is, okay, now make sure there's bundle deployments for each of those packages.
So that's in 65. And this one, so just to give everybody a quick reminder, basically we now have a bunch of package names and a bunch of bundle image URLs. And what we need to do is make sure that only one bundle deployment is ever present for each of those packages, right? And you know, the easiest way to kind of get that is just delete the existing stuff and create the new stuff. One obvious issue with that is that that could happen multiple times if you don't stop it from deleting the stuff if it hasn't changed. So we probably have to call it how we handle this. So we basically need to recognize a diff between the stuff in the, sorry, the package name and the bundle image. And the stuff on cluster. And it seems like the easiest way to do that would be to apply a label to the bundle deployment. Like maybe that's getting too technical and like deciding what we're doing, but like the easiest way I could communicate this is like we got a package name, we add a label, we get all the bundle deployments that we need, we add a package name label, and then we add a and then we, you know, look at each existing bundle deployment that has that package name, and we look at the bundle URL in it. And if that bundle URL matches the existing one, we don't have to update it. But that's probably too much in the weeds, but we can just calling out the acceptance. So I think, so I'm going to propose that the first step in this ticket is comparing the list of stuff in the solution, like take each solution in, sorry, for each package name, figure out if a new bundle deployment needs to be created based on the bundle image URL. Does that sound like a good first step, everyone?
That's good.
For each entity, identify if for each package, identify if there is an associated bundle deployment. Where I have like subtasks. If no bundle deployment exists for a given
Hey, Alex, don't we already have this kind of already laid out in the acceptance criteria? In the issue description there?
Yeah, but those aren't really like, those aren't, you can't really break those down into issues, right? It's not actually implementing the steps that it, I mean,
Yeah,
I guess
but do we
you
need
could.
to? I don't know, you guys decide, but it almost seems to me like the acceptance criteria is fairly implementable as it's already described.
I think that's fine, but could we like for the, I guess we don't need to call this, actually we'll call this action items. Sorry guys, I'll go by and make sure that all these words are consistent that we're breaking the thing into, but does it make sense just to say the operator creates a bundle deployment for each? Like, can we just make it like the operator API ensures that the correct bundle deployments exist for the given set of operator for the constraints introduced by the existing operator CRs? And that basically
Like,
means,
the way I would probably say that is, assuming that number 65 is blocked on that last one we did, like, the input into this story is you're given a map of package name to bundle image. And your job is to go make sure that that's the exact set of bundle deployments that exist, no more, no less.
right,
With some caveats and hand waving about ones that we're managing effectively. Which I think you captured in the acceptance criteria already. We basically say like, okay, only one bundle deployment per package. Well, we've got that because we have a map of package name to image. And then we're going to create one if we don't have one for that package. We're going to update it if we do have one for that package, and we're going to delete it if the new package map doesn't contain that package.
yeah, so maybe this does a better job. The operator controller ensures that the correct bundle deployments exist for each entity in the solution set. So Daniel, I'll answer your question from chat in a second. But I just want to make sure we have this one filled out. Right, so Joe, does this address your concerns?
Yeah, I think that's probably fine.
Okay, cool. Daniel, you had asked if there's a reason we're not using the milestone thing. It's largely because the RuckPack and DEPI projects are independent projects, and we didn't want to force them to create milestones based on OLM v1 milestones, right? So we opted to use a labeling system that makes it so that they can continue to create milestones that make sense in the context of the project that they're developing. However, we are able to assign issues to the repository and label them such that they appear in these milestone views, and allows us to kind of drag them along and see where they're at, outside of like forcing them to take on works just because this OLM v1 stuff is, takes priority. And the goal with this approach is to make sure that the RuckPack and DEPI upstream communities can remain really healthy, even though we kind of need to tie them together for our operator.
And there's a technical piece of this too, which is that you can only put like an individual issue can only go in one milestone at a time. So like we couldn't have both an OLM v1 M1 milestone and a RuckPack 1.3.4 milestone on the same issue. So that's kind of why we were like, okay, well, let's let the milestones be milestones for the project, and we'll have this lighter layer on top.
Yeah, okay, whatever works.
Okay, cool. Well, congratulations, everybody. I think we got the outside of like if the pleasant developer workflow experience, which technically isn't required for an end-to-end, but it's something we need to subscribe to. It's we got our workflow done and all our action items broken down, which is really exciting. So we have 10 minutes. We can start flesh it. Is there anything else we want to add to 65 before we start making action items for the pleasant developer workflow?
There's one other thought that I had here, which is sort of out of left field, but I'm trying to think of another sort of end-to-end tie-in. So in the milestone, we talked about you can do an install and an uninstall. And the way that we would have to do that right now is essentially kubectl apply a YAML that we've prepped for the demo. So I'm wondering if anybody has opinions on whether we could incorporate kubectl operator into the milestone one, such that we could go and write a kubectl operator install package name and have that do like as part of the demo, and then we'd have the kubectl operator uninstall.
I like it.
If we think that's too much extra stuff to put into the milestone, I'm totally fine if we don't, but I think that might be a nice extra little sweet stuff to really tie the whole thing together. And it also seems like it could be something that we generally just are able to work on in parallel anyway. Because all that would do is effectively look to see if the cluster has this new operator API. If so, create an operator object with that package name and be done, right? And then it, like the rest just takes over from there.
Yeah, anyway, we are going to have E2E testing, right? With that scenario.
Where maybe what are you getting at?
Well, you know, like anyway, so we have to test this operator API. So we need to have end-to-end testing, right? For this
Yeah,
project.
that's kind of called out in this bit. I
But we
think
don't-
we don't have an official definition of done yet, so that might be something we say we have to define in here. And one of the bullet points should be like, you know, test your feature.
But we don't need kubectl operator to do that E2E. Like the slightly more difficult solution is go create the YAML and apply it, and that's essentially what kubectl operator is going to do. But this is just like a little sugar basically on top of that YAML apply process.
Yeah, so
So- I like it.
yeah. So I like it too. I think it makes it nice. It's just like, I want that, but then I'm like, is that really the smallest scope thing for Milestone 1? And simply because it makes it easier to kind of showcase this with people so that we don't have to say, do this kubectl apply thing. It like makes it better for, you know, the here's Milestone 1, go use this thing and see how cool it is. And I think the easier we can make it to use this thing and test it, prototype it, the better reception it's going to get. So I'm fine kind of pulling into it. You know, I'm pretty sure we had a ticket somewhere where we said like, you know, we define what the release is, and it might be nice to add that as a release requirement for this one. Sorry. I think it makes sense to create one extra ticket just to update the kubectl operator thing to facilitate a really easy, cool demo.
Okay,
Are
I'll
you guys
go.
okay?
I'll go and update that milestone V1, milestone 1 issue in the enhancements repo to talk about that, and then we can then do some refinement of any issues we need to make after that.
That sounds good to me. And then to address Aki's concern, did we really not have I thought for sure we had like a contributor, document the contributor process. Okay, cool. Call out that new features should be tested. So the contributor workflow for these projects just need to call out that like stuff needs testing. Like we don't merge anything if it isn't tested, unless it's like doing some bootstrapping stuff that we can assume it's ready to go. Is everybody okay with that? Or do we want to like update each of these tickets to call out that implement E2E tests for each issue? Or perhaps it's even better just when we create these, you know, the issues for these action items, that's just called out in them, like implement test if it makes sense. So for example, you know, if like it doesn't make sense to have tests there, it doesn't make sense to have here or here or here or here. So this first one, it doesn't really make sense. And then, but when we start getting into this DEPI stuff, then it starts making sense. I'm always a little apprehensive to saying like, oh, call it that this needs a test, because I just feel like anytime you have any real functional code, you should have tests.
Yeah, but I think you need to spell it out sometimes, and I would prefer, or I personally like it when, you know, when you flip the PR, and if it's possible to actually have a proper or a decent CI CD run with tests, so you can even make sure that it passes tests without having to look before you even look at the code for review.
Yeah, and that's part of this test E2E thing, right? Like in the GitHub actions we called out, like that there's definitely going to be automation set up when the PR is made to run tests. It's just more of a question of, do we want to track test generation as a part of acceptance criteria at the level 2 or at the level 3 work, which, you know, this is the level 2, which kind of defines the workflow, but like a level 3.
My feeling is probably that like we should strive to build just about everything to be unit testable and have unit tests. And if we need it, if we need an end-to-end test, then obviously do that too. But I'm a little bit nervous about just like, oh, it's so easy to just add another E2E test, because those take so much longer. So at least in my opinion, like I think the thing that's super important here is that, I don't know about you guys, but when I'm contributing to other, you know, to other projects, if the other projects already have like a really nice set of tests already ready to go, and all I need to do is add one more little scenario to them, it becomes much easier to make sure that like it's easy to add more tests. So in my mind, the most important thing here is that when we start bootstrapping these repos, we bootstrap them with tests. So that way, like as we keep adding stuff, it's super easy. And then you set the expectation as well.
Yeah, because
The hard part is
that-
like, if you have a new contributor to the project and they add a new feature, it's not fair to ask them, oh, can you also like write the entire end-to-end, write the entire test framework for this new thing that you added? Like, that's not going to happen. So we need to do our due diligence to make sure that when we have contributors to our projects, they've already got sort of the boilerplate of the tests ready to go, and they can just copy paste and add their own test case in.
Yeah, and I think one thing I would also like to append to that is that like if you don't have good tests set up, you lose, or faulty tests like flaky ones, you lose faith in the project as a maintainer. But even more concerning is like a new contributor will be like, wait, they don't even have their test structure set up correctly, and it's like, I don't want to have to run my test 10 times in order to get this thing merged. Like I'm not doing that. So there's a lot of incentive to have these things, and we call them out in this ticket, which we haven't gotten to, but perhaps it's better than say calling out on each of these things what the unit, you know, like add tests as acceptance criteria, but really like outline what we're trying to get out of each of these. Like, A, we're going to have GitHub Actions so that when a PR is created, that a set of tests are ran. B, like, you know, these set of tests include test E2E, test unit, and then defining what the goal of those different portfolios of tests are, right? And how they should be structured. So can we address this concern as we fill out this ticket? I know Todd and Aki raised the original concern, so I just wanted to give
So
verbal.
can we have some like a template for the PR? So with a checkbox, like a unit test, E2E test or something?
Well,
Right.
sorry.
I would say we should, if we don't have it, also update the PR template for GitHub, and then we can include, we can even just use the OLM one. And that should include all the different review steps and things to check, and E2E should be one of them.
So for those who aren't watching the chat, the Red Hat folks, we have another meeting.
Yeah, we'll have to drop. So I'm just going to capture this as create a PR template that defines all the steps that a reviewer has to take, and one of them check for unit tests. And we'll continue fleshing this one out tomorrow, but hopefully we'll be done with Milestone V1 generation. So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your time today. And is there any closing notes that people want to bring up before we disperse? Okay, fantastic. I will talk to you all later. Bye for now.
Thanks.
Thank you.